for the Susan Taylor Podcast, where we discuss the yoga of mind, medicine, and healing. Author of Feeling Good Matters, Sexual Radiance, and the Vital Energy Program, Dr. Taylor imparts authentic knowledge and practical tools that inspire, educate, and empower us to be a healing force for positive change. So join us and take your life and our planet to the next level.
Hello, and welcome to Episode 10, Creating a Personal Practice for Healing. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about something that I mentioned in last week's podcast, using your body as feedback to gain health and vitality. And I'll give you a setup, a 5-step process to discover what is your unique practice. So let's get started. Many of us have such great intentions to live healthy and happy. With the new year upon us, it's time we set new intentions and make new resolutions. But I always say, why wait? Start now as soon as you have the urge or the momentum to do it. The deepest desire that you possess is to be happy. Everyone wants to feel good so that they can enjoy what life has to offer. Happiness requires that we have a healthy organism, namely a body, a mind, and a soul that's in tune with its inherent nature. Well, where does one begin on the road that leads to a life that promotes and supports this concept? After all, everybody does want to be happy. Well, one of the easiest and greatest tools to get started, as I mentioned last week, was to use our body as feedback, because our body is the vehicle that carries us through life. Actually, your body is a crystallization of your mind. Remember, I've always said the body and mind are one. Whatever happens in the mind is reflected in the body. Our eating, sleeping, moving, thinking, doing, and so on. It's much simpler to get started with our body, since the body is easier to access for many of us. For example, when our lower back hurts or our neck is in pain, we really can't ignore it. We may be able to suppress the pain with medications, but it's much harder to ignore this type of pain than a thought or feeling that can be buried and out of sight. When we use our body as feedback, we gain an awareness that allows us to access the mind, our feelings, our thoughts, and emotions. How many of us have a thought, and the next thing we know, we might have a cramp in our lower back, or our stomach might hurt, or we have aching between our shoulders from the stress. If we can link our thoughts and our feelings to what goes on in our body, then we can start to unravel what goes on. And it helps our self-knowledge increase. You may think this sounds so simple, and rightly so, it is, but it is a little bit challenging at times because we get into these old habit patterns. By practicing simple moves, we gain access to the areas and points in the body that may feel a little tender, sensitive, or even painful. They're signs that tell us the flow, the healing force is not working in those areas. Once we identify these locations, they become a focal point for us to start putting together a personal healing practice. And that's what it's all about when we design our own personal practice. For many years I've studied internal martial arts, Tai Chi, learning some fundamental principles about energy and its nature. It is universally understood by healers in all cultures that energy needs to circulate, not stagnate. And when it circulates, there's a flow and space for it to circulate. As I mentioned last week, we have to create space. We need space for that energy to circulate. So as we move our body, we actually open up and create space for that circulation to happen. When we injure ourselves physically and emotionally, the space that is injured shuts down and the circulation stops. That's the protocol. That's how it works. So if we have an emotional thought or a deep grief, what happens is the space that's injured, whether the mind creates this, it shuts some aspect down, some part of our body down, and the circulation stops. And that area or point around the area becomes painful or sensitive, or it becomes even stiff. But usually it's very sensitive to touch most of the time. And that's an indicator where we start. So if you just have the access to work with yourself and use your hands to find, well, what really hurts? In workshops, I do that with students. They say, no, I'm fine. And then I ask them, would you like me to just work with you? And they find places that are very, very sensitive and they don't want it touched. But if they actually learn to breathe into that space and work through it, they can release whatever emotion is in the tissue there. So knowing how and where to start the process of creating a personal practice is necessary. And keep in mind, consistency is the key to seeing results. So I suggest when I work with clients to start with something that will support their body. Start with something that supports the entire mind-body complex, because what that does is it gives the confidence and strength to break out of the inertia and move into motion. So a simple starting place can be just standing with full awareness of breath as you follow the breath up and down the spine. We can do it sitting down or standing up. In fact, you could even try that right now if you're not driving a car. Just take a moment and sit down and just watch the breath as it goes from the base of the spine to the top of the head, and then from the top of the head to the base of the spine. So you inhale from the base of the spine to the top of the head, and then you exhale from the top of the head down to the base of the spine. And you continue this in a rhythmic fashion as if it's an ellipse. So you can go up the back and down the front for 3 breaths. And then you can reverse that and go up the front and down the back for 3 breaths. Just by doing this for a few moments, you gain the awareness of how that energy flows through your body. And then after a few days, you can add a move that encourages this circular movement to the limbs and the joints. So these are just ideas of how to build your personal practice. As experience accumulates with practice, you could move your awareness to where the pain is located and even develop a plan around that. You can actually move your awareness where the pain is and use breath to move the pain out. You move the pain out with inhaling and exhaling. You exhale the pain out and you inhale and bring in the new pathway, the new energy, the new field that will actually create the energy in that space so that the negativity will be gone. For example, if your hips are tight, then you can create a modified yoga pose to open that area. You may do a lunge, a supported lunge on a chair, and just move and see. Just see where your limit is in your movement. Don't go beyond your limit. Again, pain is not the gain here, nor following a picture. A picture doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for you. This type of approach has the energy to rehab the mind field somewhat. It somewhat helps, and it adds more confidence and gives you the ability to stand on your own 2 feet. Because once you start gaining access to your own body, using it as feedback, you start getting the confidence, wow, I can do this. I don't have to rely on external sources to make me feel good and to get me healed. So as you continue the practice, you add modifications, maybe weekly or monthly, depending on the feedback that you get from your body. And that's how a solid practice is built. You can build your personal practice with yourself. I'm not talking about treating medical conditions here. I'm talking about treating yourself to building your own personal practice. There's a difference. Many times students will ask me, well, what should I practice? Everybody wants to know the specifics, 5 things to practice. And if we're in a workshop, we do those sort of things, but I also encourage people to tune in and become aware of what makes them who they are. Like, for example, how do you think? How does your body move? What feels good to you and what doesn't feel good to you? When we honor that with that clear awareness, that's where we make progress. And then you'll start moving in areas that are beneficial for you. Because, your body has its own wisdom. It doesn't think like the mind that utilizes the space between our ears. The mind is always between the ears. The body is intuitive. And if we leave it that way and we let it rest, if we remain calm, like I always say, consciously aware, living in the moment, that intuition will rise. And it gives you the guide towards homeostasis if you pay attention to its signals. All living organisms want to return towards this balanced state. And in science, again, we call it homeostasis. Each moment the cells are creating it's even enzymes, chemicals, to bring the body into its homeostasis. So don't ignore the signals and think, well, maybe tomorrow. Make a commitment and be consistent with whatever you commit to yourself, to honor your body at this moment. So your practice is a routine that serves you with stability and comfort in mind. And it doesn't have to be too long. You could set aside, just to begin, 5 minutes each day. So working systematically might look like this, for example. Step 1, take an assessment of what is right now by using your body as feedback. It's called Vikruti. Find your state of current imbalance. And there may be more than one area, and that's okay. Take note, write it down, and start to think about that. Just bringing the attention and awareness to that area begins to open up that area for you. Like you may have a stiff left shoulder or a painful right hip. Both of those, by the way, go together, meaning that if your hip is off, your shoulder's going to feel it because it does a diagonal energy field. This is very useful to take when you're taking your assessment before getting started. So take an assessment and just be aware of it. There's no judgment. There's no nothing. We all have our little quirks that go on within our body because, after all, we are human. Step 2 is the big one. Accept this. It's okay. It's okay if something doesn't feel right. Accepting doesn't mean identifying and owning it. Accepting means to just acknowledge that you have this as an issue and understand that there is an imbalance that needs to be brought back into balance. Once we start recognizing that we are out of balance, then we can bring ourselves back in balance. But when we push it aside and ignore it and commit a crime against wisdom of the body, that's when disease occurs. Because it doesn't really require that you beat yourself up and, for that matter, give up. It just requires that you acknowledge yourself, where you are, and what you need to do. But don't make it so big. Just take one step at a time. Step 3, devise a plan with the resources that you have. The one resource you have is your body and your breath. I'll bring that up over and over again. So use it. You know, your breath, if you know how to breathe correctly using diaphragmatic breathing, you can establish a 2-to-1 breath, meaning you exhale longer than you inhale. You can cure many, many ailments within the body. If you need help or want help of a teacher, the teacher will come. Just put it out there. Write to us. We'll find you a teacher, and you will have somebody coach you and work with you on that. You have to want it. I mean, you really have to want it and do have the intention that you're willing to do something and make changes for it. Your teacher, your ultimate teacher, the highest teacher that you will ever be with, dwells within you. But a physical teacher can also help. I know my whole life I've had physical teachers that have guided me, but I've done the work also at the same time. Let me give you some starting points now. Make a commitment for each day to do one stretch. If you're already doing one, then do 2. No more than 5. Master 5 stretches, 5 movements that can be your own for at least 40 days, and really learn what they are like and what part of the body and the mind interaction takes place in those poses. You can choose a movement sequence that works, for example, with the abdominal area. I always suggest people work with their breath in the abdominal area, since that's connected to everything. The abdominal area connects, it's your hub. It's your hub of vitality. It's your hub of nourishment. It's your hub of life. In Feeling Good Matters, I introduce a practice. It's called the A&P, and that's a squeeze and release practice in the abdominal area. We focus on that, and it brings you awareness to that area. Once we enliven that area, because as we get older, we tend to ignore that area, and that's why we get, the weight gain, and we just have a lot of problems. It becomes more stale. If you watch little children before the age of 5, that area moves very, very fluidly. and they move, they even walk with that area in mind. So A and P is a good one to start with. It's just a squeeze and release. You squeeze on the exhale and you release on the inhale. And then you follow this with a 1 to 5 minute practice in what we call a crocodile pose, lying face down. Allow your body to relax. You're resting your forehead on your arms crossed above your forehead. And then you watch your breath and you count 1 to 3 on an inhale. And then you exhale 3, 4, 5, or 6, whatever your capacity is. The secret is to have an exhale that's longer. And that will automatically bring your body into a state of relaxation, and the healing force will start to get activated. And do any of these practices for 40 days, and you'll experience a profound difference. So you're going to work with just squeezing and releasing the abdominal area. For those that don't have the book, you exhale, you squeeze, you inhale, you release, and then go lie face down in the crocodile position and bring your breath into your awareness and just breathe. Breathe with an exhalation that's slightly longer, preferably twice as long as your inhale. And do it for 40 days. And write in and let us know how you're doing. Step 4. If you feel discouraged, keep in mind that everything is temporary. When this journey finishes, there'll be another one right after. Life is transitory in every aspect. So if you feel discouraged starting and you feel this whole mountain in front of you, that's also temporary. Everything is temporary. Utilize your time with this in mind and apply it to your practice. Apply everything to your personal practice, because as you're strong and your personal practice develops, you'll have such confidence that nothing in the world will stop you or will knock you off your center balance. Your practice, your personal practice, is not something you've been doing the same way for the last decade or so. It needs to evolve with you. It needs to change. Not every moment, not every day necessarily, meaning stick with the practice. It will change subtly every day, but not the main practice. Because as we change our practice, or as we change, our practice will evolve. Step 5. Know that you are divine light. You're the user of the body and the mind, but you're really a light being inhabiting the body. And the practice itself, when you start working with yourself, that practice itself will guide you towards healing and ultimately to the place where you are feeling good. You're all one. Everything is solid for you. So some key points to keep in mind when designing a personal practice that's for you is to keep stability and comfort in mind. Always want to be stable in anything that you choose to do. You don't want to be wobbly when you're trying something. So for example, when you're doing that standing practice, the A and P, you might want to stand with your buttocks against the wall, or you might want to try it kneeling down if standing up is not as stable for you. So stability is very, very important. And comfort is also important. You don't want to have any pain. You want to have stability and comfort in mind. These are the keys to creating a personal practice that will give you access to your healing force. And the last point is to be consistent. Consistency gives you the stability and comfort, and it also keeps the healing force ignited and flowing. So stability and comfort, that helps you create your practice and access your healing force, and consistency will keep the healing force ignited and flowing. So this brings me to the end of this episode. If you'd like to be notified weekly for new podcasts, please subscribe. The Susan Taylor Podcast is available on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Also, you can access it on susantaylor.org, where all you need to do is click on the podcast to subscribe. Contact us, and if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you can reach us at susantaylor.org. And thank you for listening. The Susan Taylor Podcast does come out every week. And again, I'm always looking for your questions or comments and something you might want to hear. Until next time, remain calm.